Long before technology solved our everyday problems, humans invented jobs that might sound completely strange to us today. Some of these jobs were practical, born from pure necessity. Some were incredibly clever. And some, well, they were even a little bit funny. Across the world, people in ancient Rome, dynastic China, sprawling African kingdoms, and the early Americas all faced the same kinds of challenges. How do you wake up on time for work without an alarm? How do you remember all the laws of a city when most people can't read? How do you protect an entire community in the dead of night? Without machines, without apps, without electricity, people became the solution. They filled roles that connected communities, kept traditions alive, and simply made daily life possible. So today, let us travel back in time and explore some of the most fascinating and forgotten jobs that people used to do. First up, imagine a world without clocks or smartphones. How did anyone get up on time? For many, waking up was a profession. In industrial Britain, they were called knocker-ups, armed with a long pole, often made of bamboo. They would walk the quiet, foggy streets before dawn, tapping on the bedroom windows of their clients. They wouldn't leave until they were sure you were awake. You paid them a few pence a week, and in return, you made it to the factory on time. In other parts of the world, like in many Asian villages, this role was taken by a time caller. This person would walk through the community at designated hours, striking a gong or a wooden block to announce the time for everyone to hear. In some African villages, specific drum beats would echo through the dawn, signaling the start of a new day. It was a human-powered system, a living, breathing alarm clock that relied on trust and a good, sturdy stick. Next, let's talk about memory. In an age before widespread literacy and printing presses, memory itself was a profession. In many West African societies, the Griot was a living library. They were historians, storytellers, poets, and musicians who memorized centuries of genealogies, historical events, and legal precedents. A king's legitimacy or a family's land claim could rest entirely on the Griot spoken word, passed down flawlessly from one generation to the next. In ancient India, legal disputes were often settled by professional witnesses who had memorized vast texts of law and custom. Their oral testimony was considered irrefutable evidence. Think of the ancient Greek rhapsodes, who could recite the entire Iliad and Odyssey from memory, entertaining and educating vast crowds. Or the Polynesian navigators, who held complex maps of stars, currents, and islands entirely in their minds, allowing them to cross thousands of miles of open ocean. These weren't just people with good memories. They were official keepers of their culture's soul. Now, imagine you're a guard tasked with protecting a fortress or a military camp. Your first instinct might be to rely on your eyes, but what if it's a moonless night or thick fog rolls in? Some of the most effective guards were actually road listeners. These specialists were trained to do one thing exceptionally well: listen. They would post up along key roads or on the outskirts of a camp and press their ear to the ground. Through the earth, they could detect the faint vibrations of an approaching army horses, marching soldiers, or heavy supply wagons long before they could be seen or heard by anyone else. They learned to distinguish the sound of cavalry from infantry, a small scouting party from a large force. They operated in total darkness and silence, turning the ground itself into a massive early warning system. It was a job that required immense patience and an almost superhuman sense of hearing, proving that sometimes the best defense is a good listener. In a similar vein, how do you define property lines without GPS, fences, or even reliable maps? Borders and boundaries only exist if people remember where they are. This is where the boundary walker came in. Once a year, a group of respected elders and community members would literally walk the perimeter of their town, parish, or landholding. This was a ceremonial and official act. Along the way, they would point out the markers, a specific old tree, a uniquely shaped stone, the bend in a river. They would recount the history of the land and who owned what. To make sure the younger generation remembered, they would often perform rituals at each marker. This tradition, known as beating the bounds in England, ensured that the community's collective memory of its territory was refreshed and passed down. Land was remembered, not just recorded. These walkers were the human deeds to the land, ensuring that everyone knew where their world began and ended. Finally, we have the night caller. In cities and towns all over the world, the night was a time of danger. Fire, crime, and other disasters lurked in the darkness. To keep the peace, towns employed a night caller or night watchman. Armed with a lantern and often a wooden clapper or a bell, this person would patrol the empty streets from dusk until dawn. At the top of every hour, they would call out the time and a reassurance like 10 o'clock and all's well. This simple call let sleeping citizens know that someone was watching over them. But their job was more than just a comfort. They were the eyes and ears of the sleeping city, watching for the first signs of a fire, listening for disturbances, and acting as a deterrent to anyone with ill intent. In a world lit only by the moon and a few scattered lanterns, the lonely cry of the night caller was the sound of safety and order. These jobs show us a world where human skill, memory, and senses were the most advanced tools available. But some forgotten professions were even stranger, and in some cases, much, much funnier. We'll get to those right after this. Now let us look at the jobs that were stranger, lighter, and sometimes surprisingly funny. In many ancient societies, tasting food was a serious profession. People were hired to taste meals before kings, priests, and leaders ate them. This wasn't just about enjoying a free meal. It was a matter of life and death. In the grand courts of Europe, royal tasters were the first line of defense, a human shield protecting rulers from the constant threat of poison. Imagine the tension, sipping from a goblet, knowing it could be your last. In China, imperial court banquets were massive, elaborate affairs. Tasters there ensured not only the safety of the food, but also its exceptional quality, fit for an emperor. Over in Africa, the practice was tied to spirituality. Before bread and beer were offered to the gods in temples, they were first sampled to ensure they were pure and worthy. And in the Americas, before vibrant festivals could begin, ceremonial drinks, often sacred, were carefully tested by a designated taster. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart. Food safety was paramount, and a trained tongue, a sensitive palate, was the ultimate form of protection. Before tractors and automated sprinklers, protecting crops was a very human job. In fact, some people were the tools. Human scarecrows stood in fields for hours, their mere presence a deterrent to frighten hungry animals away. Think about it. Long days under the sun, just standing there. Across Europe, it was often a job for children, who would patrol the vast grain fields, shouting and waving their arms to keep birds at bay. In East Asia, farmers got creative, using handmade noisemakers and sudden movements to create a zone of unpredictability that animals would avoid. In many parts of Africa, watchers were essential, posted in elevated huts to guard precious crops from both birds above and larger animals on the ground. And in the Americas, farmers diligently guarded their vital maize fields from dawn till dusk. It must have been an incredibly boring job at times, and profoundly lonely. But that stillness, that constant vigilance, was what protected a community's food supply and ensured their survival. In some cultures, expressing grief wasn't just a private emotion. It was a public performance and a respected profession. People were actually hired to cry at funerals. These were the paid mourners. In ancient Egypt, professional mourners, often women, would follow processions, wailing loudly and throwing dust on their heads to show the depth of the community's loss. In China, professional mourners were an integral part of funeral rites, their cries and laments believed to help the deceased as soul transition to the afterlife while honoring the family. In parts of Africa, The volume of the crying was a direct signal of respect and the importance of the person who had passed. The more prominent the individual, the more mourners were hired. In Mediterranean cultures, too, public mourning was a dramatic display, a way to show the community the significance of the departed. In these societies, grief was not hidden away. It was shared, it was amplified, it was performed. Entertainment was also a job, but not always in the ways we think of it today. Some people were hired for their stillness, becoming living statues to decorate parties or public spaces. Others were hired for their wit, entertaining kings and queens as court fools or jesters. In the royal courts of Europe, jesters held a unique and precarious position. They were one of the few who could openly mock power and speak truth to the king, all under the protection of humor. In Asia, performers of all kinds, from dancers to acrobats to comedians, were a fixture of royal courts, their skills a symbol of the ruler's wealth and sophistication. In Africa, storytellers often used humor and satire to teach lessons and comment on society. And in the Americas, ritual performers skillfully balanced seriousness and play, using masks and comedy within sacred ceremonies. Laughter, in these contexts, wasn't just for fun. It was a tool. It could be controlled, directed, and sometimes it could be incredibly powerful. Before newspapers, the internet, or even postal services, news had a voice, and that voice belonged to the town crier. These individuals were the original broadcasters, their job to announce everything from new laws and royal decrees to upcoming market days and public warnings. In the towns and cities of Europe, the sharp ring of a bell was the signal for everyone to gather around and listen. "Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes," they'd shout, commanding attention before delivering the day's news. In parts of Africa, the concept was similar, but the instrument was different. Drummers would beat out specific rhythms that traveled for miles, spreading messages from one village to the next. In Asia, official callers would stand in public squares to announce decrees from the emperor. And throughout the communities of the Americas, public announcements were a vital way to keep everyone informed and connected. In a world without print, information traveled as sound. It was carried on the air, and people listened. These jobs may seem strange, even bizarre to us today, but they remind us of something incredibly important. Before we had machines, algorithms, and automated systems, people were the system. Human skill, human endurance, and even human emotion were the engines that made societies run. From protecting a king to protecting a crop, from announcing the news to processing grief, people found a way. If you enjoyed this journey through the world of forgotten work, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more rare and unusual history from around the world. We'll see you next time.